Hello and welcome to Nightmare Tonight. My name is David Stockdale. I'll be your host on this excursion into the dark unknown. Tonight I have with me Kyle from the YouTube channel LaborKyle. I highly recommend you check out his channel. He does analysis of video games. In particular, I think his video on the Outer Worlds is really good. So check it out. Tonight we will be discussing the death cult of capitalism. Now, if you have a few bucks to spare and you want to support me on a monthly basis, you can do so at patreon.com/Nightmare Masterclass. Okay, in the words of a certain Italian plumber, let's-a go. Hello and welcome to Nightmare Tonight. I have with me LaborKyle. Thank you for joining me. Would you mind just telling people a little bit about your YouTube channel?
Not at all. Thank you for having me. Your show's very good and matches all of my interests. My name is Kyle. I'm a graduate student and an academic who makes videos on YouTube mostly about video games and various elements of theory, not just Marxist theory, though I am a Marxist. I like to talk about theory as the sort of broader idea that includes post-structuralism and psychoanalysis, and basically a bunch of French guys in the 1960s who were thinking of some sort of wacky stuff in continental philosophy. I'm an historian, actually. I study history, but I've always been very interested in sort of the big picture of things. And I really like pop culture. I'm sort of drawn to strange and odd things most of the time when it comes to art and when it comes to media. So I've been thinking quite a bit about how I can engage in a way that's informative and entertaining and interesting for people, using stuff that maybe people are familiar with, maybe using a sort of a section of pop culture that has plenty of critical analysis, going on, but not nearly as much as I think is warranted from an industry that's bigger than the film industry at this point. And so I'd been making some videos on YouTube for a while, sort of slowly, but on various topics, just kind of experimenting. And then one weekend I had this weird idea to basically, I wanted to do a series and call it On Games. And so I thought about the game that I played in 2019 that I had the game I played to completion the most, which was the game The Outer Worlds. And I sat down and I made a video about it in a weekend, and a lot of people seemed to really like it. It seemed like it resonated in a way, which I was very, very appreciative of. Sometimes I still have trouble understanding.
I really like that video. Yeah, I've seen that one.
I'm really glad you liked it. It was this weird sort of project that just kind of manifested itself because I got a little tired of doubting myself when it came to sort of creating this content. I kept doing stuff that I wanted to do, but also stuff that I felt like, oh, well, this is what I should do. This is what's maybe necessary. I'm a trained historian. I should only talk about historical topics. I should try not to get too weird. I should try not be too artistic. I should try and be a little more straightforward. And in the old videos, you see plenty of my personality. I like the old videos. I think they're good. But I was in the back of my mind saying, I just want to make crap about video games, and I want to talk about theory, and I'm going to do it in a way that offers critique of institutions that people have grown really familiar with that I think are wrong, like capitalism in particular. So I just sat down and I did that because it was going to make me happy at that moment. And I had this just sort of spur of the moment decision to make. Like, what do I feel like doing right now? And I made a choice to do the thing that I wanted to do. And then I realized that I should have been doing this the whole time. That while I'm still going to talk about other topics or that sort of a thing, I've been playing games since for literally as long as I can remember. And I enjoyed it too much to not take stock in it. So since then, I've made 2 other videos that are both on similar theoretical topics that are sort of using pop culture and video games to kind of bring those topics to the surface and use it in a way that a larger portion of us can understand. And now the 4th will be out really soon. And I can't stop. I have about 800 ideas. And it's been great so far.
That's a good problem to have.
It's the best problem to have. I better than that. I could wander in the desert, which is fine, but I'd rather like go swimming, I think.
Hell yeah. I really liked your video on Zizek, and I can't remember the title of that game.
Yeah, We Happy Few is the title.
Yeah. I'm going to have to check that out. It looks really cool.
It's a neat game. It's and thank you very much. I really like that video too. That video was an attempt to sort of push myself while still sort of leaning into this thing that was sort of getting me excited about making stuff on YouTube. And I had played We Happy Few a little bit and hadn't finished it yet, but it made I like talking about. I mean, it's almost on the sort of the left wing of YouTube, and bless everybody who's doing this. I think it's great. It's almost capitalist realism has almost become a cliche rather than an investigative means for analyzing culture in the social world. And I wanted to take that concept and move it around as much as I can. And I thought I should do some psychoanalysis. That would be challenging for me. And I've read plenty of Zizek. And yeah, it's a really neat game in terms of its procedural generation. It's not perfect. It's got rough edges, but it was honestly, it was a blast. I just really liked playing it. And shocker, playing video games and then talking about theory, like 2 things that I love so much, was super fun for me. I'm so surprised.
Yeah. Are you excited for Zizek's new book?
I am. I have a lot of thoughts on his new book. I have a lot of thoughts on his newer books in general. Not all of which I haven't read everything he's written because he's unbelievably prolific. Like,
oh yeah,
it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and I don't know how you do that. Besides, the thing that he is used to doing, which is kind of sitting down at a keyboard and just typing until the book appears. I think it. To summarize how I feel, I don't know anything about the book besides the little blurb that I read, but to summarize my feelings on the topic, I would say the Virgin Zizek versus the Chad Alain Badiou, who posted he posted an essay in I think it was Verso Books blog about COVID that was really, really good and pretty short and pretty easy to understand. So I'll take swings at Zizek all day, but I actually respect him as a theorist and have read a lot of, have made a big effort to understand exactly what it is he's trying to say.
Yeah.
He's a Lacanian. Lacan is the hardest if we're talking about difficult reading. And so he always was a challenge to me. And then I found out that while, yes, I know he's a polarizing figure, but shocker, the most popular Marxist in the entire world has something to offer us. So we should do our best to try and engage in the ideas. The newer books, I don't know. I would have to read more of them, I think. So if I get time, I'll do my best.
I honestly, I'm about halfway through Sublime Object. And that's the only one I've really read other than like whatever essays he's, published through like editorials and whatnot. And I have to say, that's, I guess this is like his Sublime Object is like what he's known for. It's like his seminal work. So far, I find it to be pretty digestible when I'm not being lazy,
So it absolutely. I actually really think it is. Like Sublime Object of Ideology was his like first real book, Like and the reason why it's so important is because it describes the intersection of Zizek's interests that I think is I think it's something that people miss in general. How he's indebted to really like three sort of sections of thought, sort of German idealism, revitalizing Kant in some way, shape, or form, and as well as Hegel in particular. And then combining that with the work of Marx, and then on the next side of that, Lacanian psychoanalysis. So Lacan's expansion on and movement through Freud. And it's very interesting. I think more than anything, the best thing that prepares someone to engage with Zizek is just show. If you just look at a page of Jacques Lacan, automatically you see math formulas. And it's like, oh, this is supposed to be about psychoanalysis, but I'm looking at math right now. And yeah, he uses the math and it makes sense, the math. But it's like, it's decontextualized and then recontextualized in whatever Lacan was trying to do, that it can just be, he can be so difficult. And so when you move over to Zizek and you see Lacan integrated into much simpler, like still not easy stuff because it's continental philosophy, but like much like more straightforward, clear, like demonstrable, like clear ideas that are sort of demonstrative of a philosophical legacy. Because if you're familiar with the field of philosophy, it's like history. Like you trace thinkers back through and other thinkers, how they engaged with people, how they changed their ideas or whatever. And Zizek does so in a very cool way. He doesn't have as much pretension when it comes to these sort of demarcations between ideas as like a more traditional academic would. He just kind of sort of blazes his own path. And as a result, sometimes you come up on some stuff that, oh, that was a bit of a dud. Like that didn't make a whole lot of sense. But then on the other side of things, you have Sublime Objects, which I think is very important, as well as a book called The Parallax View, which is the one in the Zizek video that I made. That was the main reference and touch point for his work that I was using. Mm-hmm. And you find that like the ability to take Karl Marx and like not just in some ways complicate Marx, but to also incorporate Marx in a way that people haven't really seen before, in a way that like doesn't disregard the second half of the 20th century, in the post-structuralist turn and the postmodern turn, and that instead tries to sort of wrestle Marx into the present in a way that's not just about looking back on some previous political project or some other interpretation, but that's engaging with the sources as active ideas, which is really what philosophy is. So like, if I have to hand anything to Zizek, that's the thing that I would hand to him, that he just, it's kind of like, people are really going to hate the way that I say this, but it's just really true. It's kind of punk rock to take, they're going to hate that, but I mean, it really is true to not give a crap about the boundaries that are traditionally set up, and to instead try and interrogate your sources and these ideas in the best and most effective way, or the most interesting way, just really to try and pull like kernels of like meaning and application that are useful for our contemporary period and not just for like thought projects or whatever, I think is not easy to do considering the pressures of certain sections of academia. Not that Zizek has pressure in academia. He totally doesn't. He's fine in academia. But regardless, right. I think he did that really well. And I want to do that too. I don't want to do things the way that everyone else has been doing it, to be honest.
I appreciate that. Let me ask you something. I didn't anticipate going down this rabbit hole, but now that you're starting to talk about it, I'm just curious about your opinion. Do you think Zizek is a proper materialist? Because there are times, like I said, I'm only halfway through Sublime Object. I've listened to quite a few of his talks, and I've listened to his debate with Jordan Peterson, and there's this moment in that debate where Peterson's like, well, why don't you just abandon Marx, and why don't you be, and basically saying like you don't need Marx, and he sort of gave a roundabout answer to that question, which is like, oh, he was really impressed with how, Marx brings up these tendencies, and then he talks about counter tendencies. But I got the sense that the subtext of what he was saying is like, I'm really more of a Hegelian. Am I making sense right now?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. What's your take on that?
So I think the sort of true materialism is something that we can all complicate, which is the first thing that I'm always trying to do. If we're complicating the idea of materialism, the easiest way to do so is to look through materialism itself, which has in fact been complicated many, many times over and over again. Materialism is a concept that goes back sort of pre-Platonian in terms of philosophy. It's been around for a really long time. And when Marx talks about vulgar materialisms, he's meaning the materialisms that came before him, which is a philosophical idea about the realness of the material. And what Hegel and then what Marx was trying to do through Hegel was sort of take the idea of how does consciousness develop, and how does that then inform our knowledge about things. And when Hegel was discussing this, he talked about, consciousness and the development of epistemology, as we call it, knowledge, as something that, descends to earth as spirit, and how sort of ideas, and the way that ideas come into conflict with each other, and how this forces human societies to make changes, how this was sort of the driving force for history. And Marx basically just took that idea and flipped it upside down and said, nah, the material is what is structuring the consciousness. And then that is the conflicts around the material is what's moving this stuff forward. And even further than that, dialectical materialism is in general, it's a Marxian idea that is often sort of preserved in a certain kind of amber, I think. It's sort of like it's supposed to be this like systematic sort of a thing, right? Like a materialist, looks this way or acts that way or believes X, Y, or Z. And well, first of all, we see that materialism hasn't meant one thing. That over time it's meant a multiple different things. And then when it comes to Zizek, he comes after a whole bunch of thinkers who were doing their best to like engage with the material, but also not like just relegate themselves to this idea of the material in one particular way. Say like an Engels interpretation of the material, and then how Lenin went and used Engels quite a bit in his interpretation of the material. But then throughout the 20th century after this, we had all of these different other scholars and thinkers and philosophers, including a bunch of Marxists, who started engaging in spaces that didn't necessarily feel like the sort of same materialism that was working before. You start to see the rise of critical theory and cultural analysis, like being done by Marxists. This the Frankfurt School in particular. All of these things are sort of like now the material is being inserted in less material or immaterial spaces, and it's being sort of oriented into like a broader scheme of how the material interacts with these sort of ideas that we don't see as material, but that are really bound together in a way that, I mean, really that's what people are trying to figure out. How does the material and say like human subjectivity, how do these things interact with each other, and how do they sort of shape and change one another? How does this like insert itself into the world, and then how does it change the world, and then how do other people interact with it, and so on and so forth? Like you can go on and on and on down the rabbit hole, and that's basically what all these philosophers are doing. And it's a big long point to just say that materialism is and dialectical materialism even too, like the post-Marxian like materialism, I think is appropriately being sort of integrated into a broader understanding of the world that people have been taking more idiosyncratic, more sort of like off the beaten path ways of engaging with quote unquote true materialisms, and that we're finding that materialism is not the material, if you will, fixed idea or a fixed concept, either philosophically or in actuality. So that what's to me jumps out about all of this is that I think we could come up with reasons why Zizek is like truly the authentic materialist, or he is the like absolute opposite of an authentic materialist and is authentically Hegelian or is authentic. I think we could continue to try and grapple with answering this question, but the more important question is, what is materialism, and how has materialism sort of changed after Marx? And then how have people used these materialisms to pose other philosophical questions? So to answer the question, I think Zizek is a materialist? Yes. Because I think we can very easily, as I just showed, just take 5 minutes and start complicating the philosophical concept in a way that has been complicated by actual philosophers for a really, really long time. And so as a result, I think the answer is yes, but it's, as with all more contemporary sort of like Marxian ideas, some that we even call post-Marx, for example, like Ernesto Laclau, we call him a post-Marxist sometimes. Tony Negri and Michael Hart, they're considered post-Marxists as well, because these thinkers are using like ideas that came around when Marxism was falling out of vogue in the academy. A lot of them were Marxists, sort of vaguely Marxist, or wrote on Marx, or used him more heavily to begin with. I think Jean Baudrillard is a good theorist. I think Michel Foucault is a good theorist for that. And then you see, as their work goes on, they move further and further away from Marx. And then what actually, all the people that I just mentioned, including Zizek, including Laclau, including Tony Negri, what they're trying to do is say, okay, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one. We need to integrate Marx back into this in the same way that we need to integrate the material into all of this other stuff. The other stuff is still important, but if we're not doing our best to try and leverage it to figure out what happens in the material space or what makes materiality, or to answer those questions, then we're not doing a very good job. So at the end of the day, if you're integrating materialism in some way, shape, or form into a different philosophical concept, you're enough of a materialist for me. But the reason why is because I can't find a good answer as to the good materialist besides I hear Marx, Engels, Lenin, and sometimes I'll get other sort of like more contemporary 20th century thinkers. But most of the time it's this sort of, it's very historical. But I don't think it's historical. I don't think it's historical enough. I think it stops at a point and then it forgets to take into account the rest of the 20th century philosophy. Sorry, that was a long answer.
I love long answers, and I think that clarifies a few things in my mind. And just for listeners, I will include a few links in the video description or show notes to these various theorists, so you can kind of check them out yourself. Yeah, no, that was a great answer. I sort of grapple with, just from an existential standpoint, whether labor theory of value is correct. I guess that's probably not a common thing that people grapple with from an existential standpoint, but it's something that really kind of picks at me, you know? And especially right now with all of this volatility in the stock market, there's just a lot of uncertainty. And I think people are going to be trying to cling to their ideological life vests, you know? And I'm just not so sure that I'm committed to anything in particular. I know I'm on the left. I'm committed to workers improving their working conditions, especially at this time when it's abundantly obvious that they are the first line of defense against this virus, right?
Right.
I don't know. I grapple with whether or not the labor theory of value is correct. Specifically, the declining rate of profit, because it seems to me like, so obviously mainstream economists had to basically invent a whole new way to determine value after Marx, right? I guess my understanding is that the way like mainstream economists say value is determined is just purely subjective, right? I mean, am I saying anything off base here?
No. And I think, first of all, I think the question is, I think this is the correct question to ask. Rather than, oftentimes we have a tendency to like accept the conclusions of the labor theory of value without figuring out what this means for our contemporary moment. I love it when people read Karl Marx, and I think more people should. Let's go get a shovel and dig up Marx kind of a guy. I really am. I think the Marxian labor theory of value, like, sort of like, it has a really, really useful sort of framework for a good deal of time periods, and that the simplicity of acknowledging that value, in part, at the very least, hinges maybe more objectively by thinking about how much time it takes and what effort it takes and how many resources for that particular worker to create that object. And that the value of that object is not determined by an invisible hand of the market. It's not determined by a coordination of different sort of like caps on pricings that are, sort of regulated by a liberal government, and then like those that business or that point of production is then subsidized in some ways based off of the ebb and the flow of this market. It's all very theological. Like the market god has told us that these are the standards by which we should operate this year, so we're going to cut subsidies for this particular industry to keep things going and dynamic or whatever, and then we're going to move these things over to here, and we're going to shuffle a bunch of stuff around, and everything's going to like definitely come apart if we just blow on it too hard, as we can see right now, but it will last at least for like a little while longer. In general, I think the most important thing to think about when it comes to figuring out the value, or like the contemporary use of the labor theory of value, is that, first of all, it's not the Bible, thankfully. It's an idea that is integrated within other ideas, like in that, while that there are probably some flawed assumptions that I think have been historically demonstrated, and like, oh boy, people are gonna be mad at me because that's not saying a bad. When you introduce that skepticism of the coherence of the logic of labor theory of value, and you say, like, I would like to understand how the particularities of how this is applied in our contemporary moment, maybe its use has in general at all held up. Well, I hate to break it to anybody who is getting into Marx or whatever, but not everything that Marx wrote was 100% correct. But why we find Marx so useful, and why I think Marx is so unbelievably important, is that principally we have a set of economic principles and values. We have a baseline from which we can say, okay, the accepted fundamental order of our economies, the end of history when it comes to our economies, final thing, that it's not over, and that none of this is over. In particular, the conversation around it is not over. So the first thing that I would do to literally anybody who's like, well, stuff, I kind of understand it, I don't really know if it applies or whatever. Well, I think that's a really good first step to take, because it brings us to the conclusion that, well, okay, I can't read the book and have the answer to how to end capitalism. If that were the case, then those of us who actually have taken the time to try and engage with sort of Marxist and sort of Engels ideas, who have then tried to see how people applied these in various different ways, and then have tried to sort of interrogate how it's gone well, how it's gone poorly, to essentially interrogate every sort of even vaguely or explicitly left-wing government that existed throughout the 20th century. Like these are all good things to do and important things to do, but in the big picture of things, there's 2 points that I would like people to think about. One, how are we like pulling these things into the present, and not in a way that's just like this is the good idea and and we should do this idea, but how are we saying like how are we thinking about the reorganization of an economy based off of a labor theory of value? And how do we transition from all of this stuff that we already have that's all set up into something that is like interested in the preservation of human life by interpreting production in a way that takes into account what it does to workers? What I do know is that, one, labor theory of value can't be in the way that Marx described it, like down to the very letter, let's say down like every single detail of it. Well, it can't be applied to the contemporary period because we've deindustrialized already. The major like world powers that Marx were talking about aren't industrial world powers anymore. It's less about like the industrial mode of production, and now it's about all of these sort of various like decentralized modes of production. How many of us like work from home now? How many of us don't do? I don't make things. I'm a teacher, like, and that job's been around for a while. But like, what if like you're an administrative employee and you work from home? You don't have any hiring and firing power, and like, so how do you integrate that within this? How do I determine the value of that labor based off of the labor theory of value if there isn't a point of production that I can use to determine the price of an object? Rather, we're selling services or that sort of a thing. And I'm not saying I have literally any of the answers to this. I definitely don't. But what I do know is that when we start posing these questions, there's two things that happen. I think I keep saying two things and I just talk about one thing, so I'm going to stop doing that. There's two things that happen. One, we understand that capitalism is a dynamic form of economy, and that the reason why it exists now, especially in the form that it does now, is because it was willing to react directly to critique of it, and then to change itself in such a way that puts distance between like applying these ideas, sort of revolutionary ideas, like in their immediate form. So when like, and to this, I think about like, it's not as much in our contemporary period about these particular modes and like points of production. And it's more about the conditions that people live in. And so like, there's this immateriality to labor theory that I think a lot of people's concern, Marxist concern, is that they say it's not dialectically integrated in the way that it's supposed to. And part of the problem is that the dynamics of capitalism that are changing means that alienation also means something different than it used to. Not only does work, your leisure time and your subjectivity, like not only have these been changing alongside of the changes in capitalism, but capitalism has been paying attention to this and it has adjusted itself accordingly. And so what we have now is neoliberalism, this very sort of like, there are absolutely still like big like centers of production in powerful nations in the United States that are very, very rich, like that use this, like exactly like the US, that use this as leverage in order to continue preserving their hegemony, their power. However, this is no longer the only primary function of production anymore. Like production is not just about the creation of a commodity. It is about the maintaining of bureaucracy around the creation of like of these commodities. Think about like marketing in general as a firm. Shout outs to the marketers. I know y'all work your ass off. Like, and I know you got to design everything, and everyone has their ideas, and they think that their ideas are so good and that it's totally going to work, and all their stuff looks like crap. But you are not creating a commodity necessarily.
Right.
when I worked in these types of like officey administrative jobs, I was not developing commodities. So how am I integrated into the labor of theory of value? Well, I
Yep.
am, but what requires us is it requires us to figure out like what exactly that means in a world that doesn't have a bunch of people going into factories to create objects that then go out and then people buy. Now, like most of us we're in this sort of like weird atomized like awkward space to where like we're not just told to sort of like distinguish ourselves in this like radical way as individuals under liberalism, but capitalism is doing this as well. And so there are these little like emerging points of sort of like new production that it's hard, like you can't make a math formula to judge how exactly like someone is contributing to the profit and like the profit that's being generated by their workplace. But what we do have is an unbelievable series of individual people in marginalized groups who have been pushed to the very, very brink, and that have a condition in their lived life as they breathe and as they walk and as they eat. They see around them the differences between how some people live and how others do. And while I think labor theory of value, again, for anyone who's mad at me, I think it's extremely useful. And I think it is the framework for this, that when it comes to producing whatever it is out there, you as the worker are basically leveraging your skills and abilities to make that happen, but you do not get a fair share of the profits because the price of whatever it is determined by this other that's not you. And so the critique of the mode of profit, I think, is really, really important for labor theory of value. But the hard thing that we have to do now is to figure out how this applies in the 21st century when a bunch of us are like have been furloughed and are working at home, and then there's the other half of us who are all have to go to work. All of us are broke, and none of us like can stop working. Some of us go in, some of us don't. There's so much difference now that we need to complicate things, and we need to be willing to like be bold and to say, I need more answers, and I want more answers. And if you want to be a Marxist, but you're having difficulty figuring out how labor theory of value applies in the contemporary moment, you can still be a Marxist. And if someone doesn't like that, well, okay, I'm sorry.
I like that. You spoke of the market god earlier, capitalist realism as well. Obviously, we're dealing with a global pandemic right now. Over the course of the past month or so, various world leaders have advocated for allowing the spread of coronavirus in order to maintain, I guess you would say, economic viability. Not too long ago, we had Boris Johnson in the UK advocating for everyone in the country to just go ahead and contract the virus so they can develop herd immunity. We've had a handful of conservative firebrands in the US here saying we need to reopen the economy, perhaps by putting low-risk individuals back into the workforce. We had, I forget his name, the former Goldman Sachs CEO said something along those lines.
Yeah.
What do you make of that reasoning?
I make quite a bit of it. Quite a bit of it. I basically have a video coming out about it that like, okay, the argument that I think I think addresses the point that you're talking about, which I think is a really important point, that there's these sort of figures who are, as we were sort of just implying, like operating in sort of a different space, who are in the midst of a global crisis where the vast majority of us are figuring out going to like feed ourselves, how we're going to protect the people around us, especially those who have like compromised immune systems or who are in sort of precarious situations or that sort of a thing. Like what the main difficulty I think that we're having is figuring out what exactly the problem is, how it started, and who is responsible. Most of the time, we can see the culprits in front of us, but those culprits themselves are then like attached to all of these various sort of like different ideas or different individuals or what have you in different sort of like spaces to where they can then continue to sort of look inward and say, oh, there's this crisis happening. How can we sort of rearrange things and sort of like in the meantime preserve the things that we have and maybe in the future work to our advantage? Like there is like people use the term death cult and they're correct about it and for a very specific reason. I think about quite a bit the idea that there are the wealthiest people in the entire world right now, and throughout like the past at least several years. Not only do they have knowledge that we do not, and that is inaccessible to us, information that we are just not going to have. The best way that I can think about that is, bless him, Senator Richard Burr in the United States, he's the head of the House Intelligence Committee, I believe. These are the people in the U.S. Congress who have the most access to the most classified information that exists. He heard about a warning about the COVID pandemic and how it could essentially, look like like the economic fallout from this can look like the early 20th century. And we're seeing that now, considering how many people have filed for unemployment here. And right before he went on television to talk about how prepared the United States is and how good of a job Donald Trump is going to do, he dumped all of his stock. And then he got on the phone with his most wealthy contributors and said, hey, by the way, some stuff's like about to hit the fan. Here's what you should really prepare for this. We're probably going to get overwhelmed. People are going to start selling stuff off. And then the venture capitalist vultures are going to start coming in and picking stuff up. You should consider protecting yourself and your business. Like I think he said something like, if you taking a trip to Europe, do you have to take that trip to Europe right now? How much is it going to cost you when you could just teleconference instead? He did that, and then he went on camera and he said, everything's going to be fine. We're totally prepared for this. He's not the only senator who did that. James Inhofe did it. Dianne Feinstein did it. Kelly Loeffler did it. And they're going to deny over and over and over again that like this had anything to do with like what was going on or the information that they had. But I think we really know that that's not true. We know that these are people who are in the highest positions of power in the United States, and they have been profiting off of the crisis, or at least minimizing the blowback, while not doing what is necessary to like properly protect the people who are being affected by this. And when they do try, it is barely crumbs, and attached to those crumbs are millions and billions and literally trillions of dollars that will go toward bailing out big business. And so that's a big, long thing to say that the concern in our contemporary moment is both that everything seems to be very sketchy and bad and it like things are going to get nasty, but also that it's hard for us to tell exactly what's happening because so much happens every day and we have such little information about it. It's hard for us to tell who exactly is responsible because everyone is linked to and it's hard for us to figure out exactly who's responsible because it's hard to figure out like where does a senator start and their donors end? Who is accountable to whom exactly? Well, I think the donors, like the senator is accountable to the donors, and so the donors are going to be able to tell him. But then we just saw there that there was a symbiosis in this particular relationship. In the same way, we think about how I think a lot about how, and unfortunately, this is just all going to be the video, so everyone's going to get. I think a lot about how there are right-wing governments that are supposedly battening down the hatches. Globalism is over. The nation state is back and everyone's going to be put up their walls and it's all going to be nation states again. But then I read articles about how Donald Trump and Viktor Orban, the absolute monster who's in charge of Hungary right now, are meeting and talking about how they share global priorities. well, okay, apparently, globalism is over, but the far right is sharing their sort of global priorities with one another. And does it stop there? Is there more money that goes into this that I don't realize? Well, the answer is always yes. And like none of this seems to make sense because it doesn't have a lot of coherency. Not only that, but our response to it like lacks the coherency necessary to actually make like good changes for really like a couple of reasons. On the one side, organizing and pushing back has become incredibly difficult in our contemporary moment because the left has been sort of beaten down, as well as organized labor. Union density in the United States is the lowest it's ever been, like et cetera, on and on and on and on. The second half of the 20th century would absolutely annihilated the left, and the United States has always been incredibly libertarian and very, very economically conservative. So we don't not only we're scrambling in the dark, we're trying to find a nickel like in a football stadium while it's pitch black, and we're doing it alone. And I think it's just all to say that like the most vexing problems that like are in front of us are not just the things that we see and that we hear and that we can honestly that we just like can feel in the air around us, this sort of space and systemic inequality and how it sort of like structures the world around us. But when we look inward, it can be hard. It's like, what are my priorities and how have I been sort of playing into this? Like how do I sort of reinforce these ideas and restructure them? And like, how do I make power in my own life and then somehow end up exercising it in my own life by, say, like, making people who work with me reply to my emails at 7 o'clock at night when I know that they're not working right now. When I'm using my behavior to police the behavior of others. We're so distant from unity, not just in our physical world, but I think in our minds as well. We are solipsistic. We like the self is the demonstrable truth. It's the only thing that we can know. Like, but I don't really, even in those contexts, I've never felt like I truly knew myself unless I was in some scheme oriented in some broader network of people. I always discovered myself by being with others because I feel very alienated just by life in general because I'm kind of a weirdo. And so
Same.
see, there you go. Like I think the problem, like, and I'm talking about alienation and we're COVID, but I think the problem is that if we're talking about capitalist realism, if we're thinking about if we're thinking about crisis, there's very few things that are better than demonstrating the precarity of our current situation than crises. Because what it does, like you take COVID, for example, there's a picture that was circulating on Twitter that is burned into my brain, which is someone who actually lives in New York City was able to describe the restaurant that these people were waiting outside of. But there was a series of delivery workers who were all waiting outside of this fancy ass restaurant that like duck and stuff, basically, that they were waiting for orders to go and take to quarantined rich people. And so what we see here is that the wealthy have choices and they have the means to protect themselves. And it doesn't matter if they understand what exactly is happening because they know that they're going to be okay. And working people on the other side of this, we have no information. We don't have a means for supporting ourselves and our loved ones. And we definitely don't have a means for supporting a broader political project that can try and exercise some change here. So when we're talking about capitalist realism, it goes so deep as to affect our perception of what is possible and what is not. And like I was saying earlier, considering the left-wing side of YouTube or whatever, that feels like it feels like a cliche because everyone talks about it so much. But I think we don't talk about it enough, and I don't think we're specific enough in order to truly understand the size of the problems that are in front of us. And unfortunately, I think the only the ruptures that I've seen that have been useful for understanding this type of a thing come through the level of death and precarity and marginalization for groups that have already just been completely bulldozed, that we are currently seeing and that we're about to see get much, much worse. I talk about imagination on YouTube and on and other places quite a bit, because I've just grown too familiar with the Foucaultian idea that we internalize structures of power, that we use it to sort of like demonstrate their validity by letting them affect our behavior, the way that we talk to people. But I also don't take the Foucaultian stance, which is that the response to this is the radical individualization of the self. And what he means by that is that if you can't figure out a larger way to connect people into a bigger political project because we're becoming so like distant from one another, well, then it's about your expression, and it's about using that expression to sort of, cut a path through all of this crap. But I don't buy that. I buy the continued interpretation of that. Like there have been theorists who have picked that up and sort of ran with it. And I more agree with them that when you integrate this idea into just production broadly, like we were talking about labor theory of value before, like if we think about production, not just industrial production, but all kinds of production, the production of communication, the production, yes, of goods and commodities and that sort of a thing, but also just like this almost immaterial space that interacts with the material at a constant rate that we can't even see. Defining that, understanding what it is, and then figuring out how to work around it is, I think, literally the only thing that we have in front of us. I think really the only response to it, as I was saying earlier, is the particular like station that we are all in, recognizing that to be put on the margins means different. It means something new every single day. And the only way for us to be able to wrap our heads around it is we can understand that there is not a lot of coherence among the wealthiest among us, because they don't have to be coherent. They just have to protect themselves as usual and let things keep running because everything is already cut in their favor. And conversely, what we're required to do is figure out a way to confront all of these various different types of marginalization and to do it in a way to where we can act as a block. Because otherwise, I think we've seen if we improv our way to the end of it, it's probably not going to happen. If we don't have an organizing project and instead we have sort of like the registering of our disapproval and some direct action. I was out there during Occupy Wall Street, so I can critique it. Then we end up with Occupy, which is this sort of it's decentralized and it's thinking about a specific issue that Wall Street is bailed out while people are left to starve or without healthcare or like their basic needs provided for. But then it's not organized into some larger sort of structure. The political project is never going to have the coherency necessary for people to do something about it. So we have to think and we have to talk and then we have to strategize and then we have to organize. And we have to, unfortunately, do it in that order, but also all at the same time. So
yeah,
if you can't tell why we haven't ended capitalism yet, well, it's for a bunch of those reasons and about a bazillion other ones as well.
It's really fucking hard, okay?
Give me a break.
Well said. Yeah. So you mentioned the term death cult specifically. I asked Kyle to be on here to discuss the death cult of capitalism, which I hope that's a clickbaity enough headline for people to listen to this.
Oh, I hope so too. I'm putting it in the title of my next video.
Hell yeah. And frankly, that's how we need to think of some of these ideologues. Like Glenn Beck saying he would proudly sacrifice his life in order to, make the line go up, I guess. Right?
Yep. Well, so I meant to make this point and I got distracted because I have weapons grade ADHD. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. Well, the reason why we call it a death cult, the best way to look at it is climate change. Who out there does not have the information that at the current trajectory that we are going, first, the sea levels are going to rise and displace a gigantic portion of the global population, all in what we call the global south. So outside of sort of the spheres of power of the old imperialism, Europe and the United States and Western powers. First, that's going to happen. Then there's going to be resource scarcity. And then on top of that, there's going to be mass death and then new fun types of superstorms, for example. I live in Florida. I'm really excited about the new fun kinds of hurricanes that we're going to get.
Oh, no.
We have this information. They have this information. They have the facts that says my family will get taken out by this too, eventually. The world's not ending tomorrow. That's what the liberals are saying. They're saying the apocalypse is now. Actually, no, it's not. First comes the slow torture and death of all the poor people in the world. That's first, and then everyone dies. So we need to get that in order.
Yes.
And we need to think about it that way. It's a death cult because there is moral justification for first the prolonged suffering of the majority of human beings, and that that what they believe is that the consequences of their judgment, which is to preserve potential profit and the stability of the market, justify any of the actions that they take at that time. The ends justify the means, and the actions that they're taking are killing people, and the actions that they're taking will eventually kill them too. And why they're a death cult is because they are using moral justifications to make that happen. It does not matter to them. What matters is the preservation of market stability and the continuation of their potential profit and the preservation just of their own life in that moment. But what they either don't understand, which I don't believe that that's true necessarily, or they don't realize, or what's most important, that it doesn't matter. Like regardless, like this sort of strange, confusing, like a group of people who have some coherency when it comes to preserving capital and protecting their own wealth and stuff, but then all of a sudden are just like, my grandpa's would die for the economy, and it's just like, dude, what the fuck does that mean? Like, I have to get my
Right.
Nana needs to water the tree of free market capitalism with her blood. Like, that sounds crazy, but it for them. It has coherency. It has the power of a morality. They're able to leverage it in a way that they're all of a sudden absolved of all responsibility when it comes to the actions that they're taking. And it's all comes from this justification that they have for their own actions. So it's a death cult because it really is one. It's we have the good that can come from our actions come from death. Death is good rather than the preservation of human life being good. And then being able to create a structure of morality using previous ideas of morality and then just, making stuff up as you go along, basically, has created this this death cult that not only has this membership that goes beyond our imagination, but that then gets internalized by normal working people who also say these things and who also in some way believe them and who also in some way think that at some point they will be able to determine they will be able to leverage this moral justification for making shitty decisions. And well, if we think about it for more than 5 minutes, you go, yo, all of the poor people are going to die. I personally don't want all the poor people to die. I would rather we do something that's more productive and that's better for a large group of people instead. But this is communism and it equals bad. And checkmate. They beat me. I'm out. I win. I am leaving the left. Expect the video tomorrow.
Yep. A lot of people right now are scared. There is a potential here. I think a lot of people, perhaps now more than ever, are going to be questioning, why is it that my my boomer parents have to die for capitalism? I don't quite get that. So, I hate to say that I see an upside in a pandemic, but I do think there is an opportunity here for anyone interested in building a better world to, I think an ideological space is perhaps opening up a little bit.
Yeah. So the thing, like, I also think about this quite a bit, and I've been thinking about it every day since this stuff happened and when we've been in quarantine and stuff. And first of all, like, it does seem morbid, but what choice is there? Like, it's not as if we're imagining a disaster scenario and then attempting to come up with our response to it, which is, one project, or that's, either a thought project or, anticipation or whatever. Like, what we're grappling with is the most immediate of circumstances, in which we see the misery and the suffering. We see the Great Depression coming. It's already here. Like, the 30% unemployment in the United States, 6.6 million, almost the size of New York City with all the boroughs, has applied for unemployment already. I saw that the FEC said like 43 million people in the United States, a country with like not even 350 million people in it, could end up being unemployed in this. And that's beyond what we have been able to imagine in recent, that's beyond our recent memory.
That's beyond, peak during the Great Depression was 24% unemployment.
Yep. It's going, this will be worse.
Yeah. It's difficult to envision what Great Depression level economics looks like in the 21st century when we have smartphones and we have, big screen TVs, which are relatively cheap. It's just very strange to me. I feel like I'm in a dream right now.
For real. Like, we don't have the same ideas of what scarcity means anymore, because we sort of like stopgaps in between that, that always get turned around like tools of guilt for like assholes to be like mean to you, when you're not bootstrapping yourself enough because you have a TV. You should be sitting in an empty room, staring at the wall, and imagining your small business. That's what you should be doing, rather than.
Which, incidentally, that's what I've been telling to landlords on Twitter now.
Well, maybe then they'd go get like a real job.
Yeah, maybe they can learn to code or something.
I mean, they should. Honestly, they should have thought of that earlier, before all of this stuff happened. Right. Like they were just.
It's called planning.
Right. They were just sitting around with their thumbs up their asses, like not thinking about their future. Like, how lazy are you?
Right.
They so this idea of, it's so hard. Like, we're talking about imagination stuff. It's hard for me to imagine a Great Depression. It's hard for me sometimes to imagine like levels of poverty that I'm not even necessarily familiar with. I did not grow up in a wealthy family. I come from a decidedly working class family. I went to college. No one else goes to college. Like, it's just like, it's very like sort of typical, like given certain elements of upward mobility, because if you can't tell by my voice, I'm extremely white. And like the ticket to the middle class is available to you. You just need to sort of like get a little lucky and then follow the right steps, and then you'll get there. This is the reality for a lot of people who are at the top of all of our workplaces. And it's a big giant joke to me, because I was told to do all of the bootstrappy crap and to work really hard. And even though I've been a leftist for as long as I can remember being interested in politics, even though I came up in a very conservative, I was still like, well, I'll still grit and bear it, and I'll make sure that things are going to get better, and and it'll get fine. I'll go to college like everyone told me to, and it's really expensive, but that'll be perfectly fine. And well, they said that I would get a better job after I got out of it, and they're like, well, just go be a teacher. And I'm like, oh, teachers don't make a lot of money in Florida. And they're like, well, move. And it's like, well, I can't really teach the upper level that I want to unless I get a master's. So then I'll go get a master's. So you go and you get the master's, and then all of a sudden a COVID pandemic happens, and now every university I can think of has put a hiring freeze for all new employees for the next 2 years already. And so what this tells me is that I don't think they thought they were feeding me a line of crap, but they definitely were, and they maybe didn't realize.
Yeah.
Because the world is so different now. And that's not a cliche. It's not like I'm not the old man yelling at cloud, but I'm not spiritually the old man yelling at the cloud. What this is a clear demonstration that after neoliberalism started happening, it came to the Western world, because we want to remember the first neoliberalism was an experiment performed on mostly South and Central American countries before everyone decided it was a good idea and all these European countries did it. So by the time it gets to the Europe and the United States in the 1980s, all of a sudden we're hitting these there was a downturn in terms of the gas crisis and Iran-Contra and all the stuff that went into Jimmy Carter, and that's how Reagan got elected. And then there's this big boom, and holy shit, Reagan's doing really good. And then, oh man, the only political party in the United States that ever looked out for organized labor says, well, screw you guys, we're all Reagan economic, we're all into Reagan economics now, so we're gonna go do the trickle down thing. And the Bill Clinton happened. And then all of a sudden we see this evolution in technology. And so then the dot-com boom happens. And all of these previously relatively stable with decent job people are getting really, really rich really fast. And they decide that it's not enough to sort of solidify their own power, to take what they have and run with it. They instead have to start legislating against other people's ability to get what they have, and then punish them for not working hard enough or any of the stupid crap that they come up with. And what we're left with is everyone and their brother telling you that you don't work enough, or that you're lazy, or that you just don't, or you just got to wait, or you just got to be patient. I went through it, so you have to go through it, or whatever. And that is so far removed from every reality that I know, from all of the working people that I know, that it's honestly hilarious. And so in terms of the limits of our imagination, first things that we have to do is realize that everyone else's limitations are also dictated by the mode of production and the successes of that mode of production in their time period. I anticipate a resurgence in terms of left-wing thought in the same way that we've seen it over the past 4 or 5 years, especially in the United States, but even more so, and not because history repeats itself, not because it sometimes rhymes, but because in periods of economic insecurity, these are the only opportunities that the left has to actually come and do something about it. And it's not because of cynicism. It's not because, it's not just because we have to capitalize on the revolutionary moment or whatever. I think that that's something that's worth doing. Sure. But it's because, and to put it just very frank, what fucking choice do we have? My choice right now is run from the virus, hide from the virus, or die. I have no other choices besides that. I can't fight back. I'm in a union, and I love my union, and we work really hard, and we're kind of kicking ass right now, but we're not a union that's getting ready to declare a general strike, because we're still organizing on the ground, because people are still coming to terms with the fact that, maybe this doesn't have to be the way that it is. And unfortunately, and I really mean it, because that is how cruel the sort of mode of production, or the sort of the economics, or the politics of the world we live in is. People have to die. People have to in order for other people to get it. I don't want that to be the case. I literally want anything except for that to be the case, which is why I do all the extra crap that I do besides my actual job and talk about politics online, is because I want to sit down with people and say, look, this does not have to be this way. I understand why it feels like this. I really, really, really do. But at the same time, there's nothing else that we have to do at this point besides either lie down and rot or die on our feet. And so if I'm dying on my feet. This doesn't mean that, I don't know. I don't want it to seem like death is an inevitability in order for like working class, consciousness or whatever to start rising again. What I'm saying is that is the case regardless of what we choose, what we want to happen. What I want to happen is to sit down in rooms full of working people and to talk about how we're marginalized and how the work that we do in society is not rewarded in the way that it should be, and how we're not being taken care of, even though we are the people who keep things running. However, what we have is an atomized group of working class people who are marginalized in so many different various ways at this point that we have to take account for all of them. There's no way that we can win and not take account for the various gradations of marginalization based off of gender and race and orientation and all of this stuff. We have to be the multitude. I'm using a Tony Negri's term. I'm not like a Negri purist or anything. I have critiques of him, but I'm making a video about him right now, and I think it's really useful. Like the multitude, like a variety of experiences in sort of beings, on a network of identity and a network of understanding of marginalization from the very, very top to the very, very bottom, the first peoples who are almost always run over, indigenous peoples, that there is a need for us to make some kind of a response, because we've seen what happens if we don't. The death happens anyways, and it's worse. The marginalization after the disaster happens anyway, and it's even worse. Disaster capitalism, as Naomi Klein has called it, and she's absolutely right about this. The shock doctrine is a very accurate book, mostly because I read it after Hurricane Katrina. But then, like it's become even more and more relevant. They are working right now to preserve what they have and to go even further after this. What's going to happen after this disaster is austerity, austerity, austerity. The little bit of a safety net that we have right now, they have moral justification to take it away, and they have people to back them up. They have the nationwide caucus of jet ski dealers are absolutely going to support them in this, and they are going to fight. So the choices that we have are do nothing and get the shit kicked out of us, do something and probably get the shit kicked out of us, or do something and maybe win. So I'm going to go for number 3, and I'm going to do everything I can to organize on the ground to make it happen. And I promise to anyone who thinks that I'm an armchair leftist on YouTube, that's not me. I bust my ass in person to make sure that workers are getting organized and doing the best that they can. And I think we should all do whatever is in our means in order to make that happen. If that's going out and helping people organize their workplace through a labor union, that's great. If that is starting, if that is getting people jump started in terms of their left-wing thought online, and then continuing to push those conversations into new possibilities, and then to learn how to organize together, I also think that's very great. All I know is that we can, the choices that we had before, and especially the choice that we have now, is die on our knees and die on our feet. And so I'm going to shoot for the latter, and I guess see what happens.
Yeah. Well said. Good Lord, man. You were like a priest. I grew up in
evangelical Christianity. A lot of preachers.
The good part of that is that rhetorical prowess.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
I watched your organizing training session that you did a little bit over a week ago. I watched part of it, rather. You said something in that stream that I guess I knew was happening intellectually, but when you said it, it just kind of hit me, So the supermarket chain Publix, there's kind of a situation with a lot of grocery stores right now, and a lot of other companies. They're not providing the necessary supplies in order to keep workers safe right now. And you mentioned that Publix is probably even, preparing to replace workers who come down with COVID-19. Obviously, that is something, if you were running a capitalist business, you would be thinking about right now.
Oh, certainly, yes.
But it is like I said, I guess I realized that was happening intellectually, but when you put it in these visceral terms, it's like I don't know. It's really just disgusting. It makes me sick.
Yeah.
And these people are underpaid. They're working 12-hour days back to back. They're often in the high-risk groups for COVID-19. I've gone to the grocery store a few times over the past few weeks, and more often than not, the person checking me out is over the age of 50, and they're not wearing a mask.
Yep. Yeah, I thought in my head, all my cash, about 3/4 of them seem to be over 50. I have not seen a single mask. The thing with Publix is it's actually even worse than that. They were forbidding employees from wearing face protection before a couple of days ago. And it's because I've seen a bunch of people harassing people online, and I think a bad news story or two. Publix is a company that not a lot of people are familiar with because they really only exist in the South. It's a very wealthy, very powerful grocery store chain that has been a part of my memory for as long as I can remember. I don't know a world without Publix. And there's a few things that I know about Publix. One, I've known tons of people who have worked there, and it's always been tough to work there. But I know a lot of people who worked there for a long time because Publix used to do stuff for its workers that other grocery stores did not do. They used to give you, you would essentially get like stock options, you would get bonuses at Christmas, you would get all of this extra stuff that they slowly started like taking away from people over the years. Well, now you get none of that. And your wage isn't competitive. And so Publix has sort of followed the same trajectory as other businesses, which has just been to just very slowly erode away at the benefits that they give to workers as they grow. And so now, since there's such a demand for people to work for Publix, and that Publix does so well, workers don't have the particular choices that they would have before to say, well, I'm going to go work at a different grocer. Well, because Publix is still, in general, providing the best pay, and they're still competitive, but they're not doing it at levels that they were before. But that doesn't matter. You weren't there. If there's anything that Publix, and this is what's so fucked up about it, and this is what makes me so mad. Anyone who understands like organizing in particularly in the South in the United States, but as well as with businesses like Publix that are huge down here and everywhere, but then don't exist elsewhere, is that their image is more important, far more important than the actual safety and the actual lives of the people who work there. And I've literally seen it with my own eyes. Not only was Publix not providing people who are working 12-hour shifts, literally wiping down germy grocery carts for people, literally pulling their groceries across a scanner with their bare hands, with a bottle of hand sanitizer slapped on the end of the register, just like it's a window dressing or something, like it's a basket of mints. And then people just touching the panel and grabbing the money and touching everything or whatever. They're in there without masks too. They were the image of Publix was so important that they did not want to appear like things were bad during a pandemic. So they put every single employee who works for them at risk death at the very, very like worst, or if they don't have health insurance, which Publix is not very good at giving to their employees, they'll get at least a $75,000 hospital bill if they have one of the decent cases of COVID. That's not if your lungs are filling up with blood and you're not on like a full time on a ventilator. Like that can be the bill that you can get. It can be more and more and more than that. But we all know a couple of days in the hospital, I can barely doctor. Like my insurance, I have a deductible for like my mental health services. So like to get the medicine that I need, that so I don't go crazy again, like I have to pay up through my deductible for that. So we have to pay out of pocket for the medication that I need to like actually function. And so Publix was like taking it a step further and saying our image is more important than your life. And if that's not a death cult, then I don't know what one is. Because holy shit, the idea that like any level of a margin of profit when Publix is making so much money right now. They have made an unbelievable killing off of this crisis. And the least that they could do is to do their best to try and flatten out the curve and prevent the spreading through their own stores. And that's the least that they could do. They could then try and actually make an effort and take care of their employees, but they do not do this. And I know for a fact, I can't say anything about it. I have Publix employees calling me all the fucking time. I can't say anything about it. Like,
yeah.
At the end of the day, Publix understands that, as I've heard it said before, that they have more money than God, and that none of these big box unions are going to actually touch them because they haven't, and because the United Food and Commercial Workers say that they're not going to. They will not do this. Or the UAW, who has organized grocery stores and stuff before. Like, none of these unions will take on Publix, and it's because they don't have enough money to compete, and because they can't maintain some level. They can't stay in the black if they're going to go and compete with Publix, because then Publix, and if they win, well, then you're slapped with a whole bunch of other like money that you have to end up paying. And then you didn't even get your union campaign done. So what I see happening right now, what I hear, I organize with the Industrial Workers of the World. I'm the branch secretary, treasurer of my local branch. I'm the administrator of my branch. I send a lot of emails, texts, and make a lot of phone calls. And what I hear from the workers in my union, the vast majority of who are still going into work if they haven't been laid off. So it's either, you've been laid off and you get nothing and you go home. Maybe we'll hire you after this is over. It's not going to happen. Or you go into work and you risk yourself. There are people in my branch who work at McDonald's and who have drive-through, just lines and lines and lines. And what the giant corporation who cuts their paycheck and who's supposed to, the only person who's there to look out for them in their workplace is saying, just close the dining room. And if anyone's coughing, make sure to send them home. And what I hear is that an employee will be like, huh, 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 and no one even picks their head up and looks around. None of that actually matters. It's kayfabe. It's not, if you don't watch wrestling, it's performative. It's this like veil that's so thin that you walk one step close to it and you can see directly through it, but that they pull over because for companies like Publix, it is so much more important that people have a shopping experience that they think is positive and good, and that they don't say anything bad about place or they say anything bad about their company, than it is to make sure that the people who are literally serving everybody, who are on the absolute front lines of this crisis, grocery store workers, frontline healthcare workers, these are the front lines of this crisis. Grocery stores is a big part of it. They won't even protect their employees. There's like, come into work and make a paycheck if you want. If you don't, well, you can go home and you can not get a paycheck because I ain't paying you. And also, you can't wear a mask because it will make other people uncomfortable. The comfort of some random fuck is more important than the person who comes in here every single day that they're asked to, and that comes in and clocks in, and that actually provides the goods and the services that you are supposedly the people, like you're supposedly the ones who are doing this. You're not doing it. You don't do any of it. And not only that, but the working people don't have they have no choice in the matter. We have no choices. We have no ability to assert ourselves because we are a blip in the eyes of these people. And it sounds hyperbolic. It sounds annoying. It sounds like I'm a walking human Twitter account. This is absolutely the reality of the situation that we are facing. I see it with my own eyes and I hear it with my own ears because I'm one of the people that workers come to when they say, I need help. And what I'm hearing right now is disaster beyond anything that I've ever heard in my entire life. And that if there's a time to be prepared for the people in your life who maybe could potentially rely on you for something, start preparing now, because it's just only going to get worse. And I know that that's bleak and that it sucks, but holy shit, we got to get with the program, because otherwise I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I have been going on little rants here and there with family members, and at the end of the rant, I'm like, gee, good Lord, what I'm saying is like unbelievably bleak.
Yeah.
But what I've been saying is we're on the Titanic, and we're especially, like you said, grocery store workers, healthcare workers, they're shoveling the coal, you know, and it's highly disturbing. But like you said, we can't just like put our heads down and despair over it. We have to do something.
Yeah.
Organizing is tricky in this particular. I mean, it's always a challenge, but it's in this particular moment, it's exceptionally tricky because meeting in person might not necessarily be in the cards. I'm not sure if conventional strikes are doable right now, at least with like a picket line for safety reasons. These are, I've seen Whole Foods is doing a sick out, so there are some labor actions going on. But with the whole pandemic situation, any kind of social unrest might be justifiably put down because we can't have crowds, right?
Right. Yeah. There's this. It's only going to get more complicated. I think we're only going to encounter new problems as time goes on, and that's the same of any organizing project in any time period. Like in any circumstances, is constantly encountering new problems and issues and difficulties that you have to figure your way around. But this is going to be very, very. And I'm not gonna lie, I have like very little advice to give on the particularities of this outside of what we've already done, which is do everything we can to try and maintain the infrastructure of things that we're doing, but just outside of, you know, our usual space. The good thing about being in the IWW is that, we didn't have a regular meeting space anyways. No way in hell we had a regular meeting space. I was constantly looking around for meeting spaces. So, now we're just going to all do it on Discord. But then you start to run into the problem, okay, like just as you were saying, like all the stuff that we usually do in person and that we use like that, and as well as all the stuff that we as organizers use as leverage in person. I don't even mean that in a cynical way. I mean that in like, organizing is about creating human connections with other people. And if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to organize something. Or if you can't find someone who can do that, like organizing is not going to happen because you have to get people to feel things. There's a portion in the process of organizing a labor union place that we talk about a lot called agitation, which agitating is basically when you are doing.
That's my favorite part.
It's the best part. It's when you get to rage. It's the best. The part It's the part I love the most, and I feel like I'm very good at it because do I have a lot of anger about the station that I have seen over and over and over again from the people in my life in all kinds of contexts. And so there's a portion in organizer training where basically we are poking the bear over and over and over again, because what we always find is that there are any number of excuses that we will give our boss, that we will give the corporation that we work for or whatever, to place the blame on ourselves, on the people around us, to just say, oh, well, I fucked up, or I did something wrong, or surely this can't be all that. Well, yeah, it's bad, but is it that bad? There are children starving in insert country in the global south here, and I'm complaining about not making enough money. And like any amount of like lib bullshit that like, or like reactionary right-wing crap that we will use like to justify blaming ourselves for the problems around us. And am I responsible for some of the problems around me? Hell yeah, I am. Of course I am. I'm an absolute mess. Of course I've made problems for myself. But that is not structural. That's just my life. That's just life in general. It's being a human being. You not having enough money to make ends meet when you work 2 part-time jobs that actually means you work more hours than other people, that is not a product of your character. That's not what happened here. Like that, and so as a result, like the obstacles that we had even before, blaming ourselves, being very atomized, aligning ourselves with the boss instead of people who share our interests, not understanding that the only way to make change is through concerted action rather than individual action. And if you really give a shit about making change for a lot of people, well, you can't do that by yourself. Like, you can make change for yourself maybe, but you can't make change for others as well. And so not only do we have that, but now we're stuck inside. What we're trying to, and some of us have like immune compromised families to where we need to stay inside literally as much as possible, or completely. And some of us are immune compromised. Some of us are elderly. Some of us are disabled and who don't have the same capability for mobility as other people. And so this is just going to be, it's going to be a new problem, and it's going to have to be something that we figure out. And the only thing that we've been able to do so far is to just take everything that we know and try and shove it online, trying to shove it into my phone as much as possible. Thankfully, we do a lot of communicating online already. When people call me, I think it's an emergency, because they just text me otherwise, or we're talking on Twitter, or we're in Discord, or any number of DMs or whatever. We have a lot of means that we can use to our advantage. And I think that we should. And technology is a big part of it. And we've seen things like that happen already in terms of, big movements of working people, or, coalitions outside of the main sort of center of capital, being able to assert themselves and make change. But the best thing that we can do is just to expect the unexpected. And this is, it's another small, tiny little blip of a blessing to come from a gigantic mess that people maybe realize that I should stop having expectations for how this is going to go. Because while we can absolutely control for things, think about it as an experiment. You can control for certain parameters. You understand sort of the information that you have in front of you, and then you synthesize that information and you make some kind of a conclusion out of it. This is the exact same thing. It's just about to get wacky. The only response that we can have to it, one, is to be prepared for that which we can't prepare for, which is just, expect the unexpected, and to try and build up as much, and I mean this very practically, organizing infrastructure as possible. And so that if that means that it's I would like to organize my building into a tenants union. Okay, you need lists, you need the people, you need people on those lists, and you need to highlight the ones who you talk to and who share your values and who are going to be or have been open to this. And you need to highlight the ones who aren't going to be open to it. You need to talk to the people who are going to do the most work with you. You need to be a leader in a way that is conducive to making other leaders. And then you need to take specific actions after that, which plenty of people can explain. If it's organizing your workplace is probably the most that I would know about. I haven't organized a tenants union, but you start with okay, well, I want this to happen. Well, how do I do it? Well, I need other people. So then you start from the people that you're closest with, and then you all fan out. And this is all, I feel like the one of the beautiful things about the online left is that it gives us all a space to sort of explore left-wing ideas and to come to conclusions on our own while still talking to other people. I think it makes people feel very powerful, and I think that's justified, and I love it. But the problem is that I see a lot of people online saying the left should, and then the following tweet is I not to be harsh, but it's the most obvious shit I've ever heard in my entire life. We should organize our workplaces and then operate as a block in order to defeat the capitalists and to get the things that we want. Oh shit, no way. I should have thought about thinking about various gradations of oppression. None of us have ever mentioned that over and over again already. And that's new ideas for some people, and I'm being cynical, and I don't mean to be, but those are new ideas for some people. But at the end of the day, you have to administrate this. The only and doing so online or doing so IRL, regardless of your organizing project, if you're not, keeping the lights on and making sure you're going to meet with your whole building. Where are you going to meet? Who's going to host it? How are you going to run the meeting? What are the practical things that are going to go into this organizing project? Do you have the capacity for it? If you don't, that's totally fine. Do you know someone who can help you?
How the hell do you keep your landlord from finding out?
Yes. Oh my God. Like, because if you're not careful, if you don't put your head down, that is like the point that I want people to understand the most. If you're not careful, it can all come apart immediately. That can be after 5 minutes of doing work. That can be after 6 months. And then you're not careful. And then someone goes and like rats you out. And then your whole project is done. The whole thing. Like, organizing is about the long game. And yeah, we have short game opportunities that are revealing themselves to us. And you bet your ass, I have my shoes on in preparation for when shit hits the fan. I would like to help working people fight for the things that they need. But what am I doing between all of these potential revolutionary moments to try and organize for when that happens? Because I guarantee you, spontaneous movements, they don't look like revolutionary organizing all the time. And most of the time, what looks like a spontaneous movement, there's a revolution as a spontaneous idea. Yeah, there's a lot of spontaneity there, but before that, it was a lot of people sitting in rooms and figuring out how they're going to get enough pizza for everybody for the next thing. It's a lot of people like, do you have this person's cell phone number so I can track them down and get the thing that I need? It is a lot of that. It sucks, but that's the point. It's hard. They've made it hard, and they've done it on purpose, and they are going to continue to make it harder. The longer we wait to like take action, as in like, I need to figure out how to practically organize something, like, or I need to figure out even what that is. And I'm not trying to put too much urgency or pressure on people. I'm really, really not. Because if you feel that way, I swear to God, you come and you DM me and we'll talk about it. My DMs are open on Twitter, and I'm not joking about that. But like at the end of the day, the problems that we have are, one, brand new a lot of the time, so we need to prepare for them. And two, they're problems because we don't have the organizing infrastructure to plug this into anything. There's no radical syndicalist network of various independent trade unions. There's no vanguard party. None of that shit exists right now. So guess what? We have to make it. And I don't know how to do it, but we got to start throwing spaghetti. Because if we don't start throwing spaghetti, then like everyone's just gonna get like the slow death continues, and it gets worse and it gets more brutal. And the most marginalized people in our communities that I know, if you're thinking about being left wing, in your heart of hearts, I know you give a shit about them. I know you do, even if you're cynical, like we all have been at one point. I know that you give a shit about those people. That's why you're here. Then you need to think about what it is you're going to do. You wait for the revolution and it doesn't happen. You start organizing now when the rupture begins. Well, who are people going to look to? Are they going to look to the guy who doesn't know anybody and who was, talking online? This is all me, by the way. I am in all of this. When I say we, I always mean me too. I promise, and anyone who knows me knows that I mean that. If you want to anticipate these moments happening, you need to be the person that people look to. They need to know who you are. They need to know that you have an ability to help them, which usually means an organization with you and behind you. And they need to know that they can trust you and that you care about them. Because if people don't know that, they are not going to come to you for help, because they can't trust you and they don't know you. And boy, is every single person and their brother telling me not to trust any human being in the entire world for my entire life. You can't trust anybody. You can only trust yourself and, and blood and Jesus or whatever. This absolute like crap that I realized was like getting in the way of me like taking physical steps towards organizing stuff. So like start now.
Atomization.
Yeah. I mean, just our individuality that's supposed to gift us so much, but that doesn't gift me anything besides telling me that I'm like a fucking loser. That's all. What individuality has gifted me is my own self-esteem, which is trash. What being with other people and has gifted me is the vision of someone else, which for someone like me is the thing I need in my life to see things how they are and rather than how I perceive them, because I have been broken too. I have been also told that I'm not good enough, that I don't do enough, that I fucked up. And boy, have I internalized that. When you're a gay kid growing up around people telling you that like being gay is the most disgusting thing in the world, because that was the big issue in the 1990s or whatever. Like when you grow up around that, you internalize shame. And working people of all shapes and sizes and colors, we all internalize this shame and this blame for ourselves. When sometimes I fuck up, but does that make me a bad person? And have I, in the projects that I've failed, have I purely failed because I sucked? Or are there other things happening here? And if there are, how do I fix them? We can't start doing that until like we just begin. And then also until we're willing to put ourselves out there and say to the people in our lives, I know that things are weird right now, but I'm going to demonstrate to you over this time that you can trust me and that I have your best interest at heart, because there's a death cult that's trying to kill us, all of us, and they think it's a good idea. Yes. Holy shit.
The death cult of capitalism.
Yep.
Kyle, the YouTube channel is LaborKyle. Check it out. When can we expect the new video? No pressure.
Honestly, I would expect it in the very early parts of this coming week. That's the first week of April. I think Monday or Tuesday, I would say. April 5th or 6th.
Awesome. I look forward to it. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being generous with your time. And yeah, this was great.
Thanks for having me. I really like being here. It's comfy.
Comfy. All right, we'll leave it there.